In terms of learning, we also look at ways of knowing by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. For this, I don't really have a huge amount of time. I honestly don't feel like I can do this topic justice in the limited time that we have in this lecture. If you look at the VCAR website, they have like lists of suggested resource activities and that kind of thing. And when you look at it for this topic, you will see different things like, if available, going on a guided tour with an elder, or having an elder come in and give a presentation. In terms of ways of knowing, some of the key advice I would look at, try to find things local to your area. For example, I grew up on and I live on and I'm presenting from land where the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations are the traditional custodians of that land. And so I'm more likely to look at resources that are connected to that country and things for that. If you're unsure where to go looking, there are different lists you can look at. There's also, VCAR's released specific guidance in relation to the memory topic, and I found for me that as a non-Indigenous person, that my understanding of this topic was also helped when I learned more about the connections that we see in memory. In there, they've got, in that guidance, resources that can indicate more, for example, if you don't know who the traditional custodians are in the land that you're on, where you can see maps and look information in relation to that. I have put in some information here about linking to The Guardian, which produces different news articles, because it's often written by academics, written for a general audience so that you can understand it. The conversation is a suitable resource for VCA psychology. VCAR have used excerpts from the conversation before in exam materials, and you can look here as one of your sources for gaining more reputable knowledge when it comes to this, because I know sometimes on the internet it can be confusing to know where to look. Pay very particular attention when you're looking at the study design. The phrasing of that is very particular. So when you see as a system of knowledge patterned on country, that is very intentional. So you can see things like a story might be told about a young woman who goes into an area who she's not supposed to, and then she gets turned into a lizard that makes this kind of go back motion. So that teaches not just about the behavior in ecology or animals that you see in the area, but also teaching you about what's allowed, what's permissible, what's not. And that's something that you often see in this context where you have a lot of integration, and it's not considered always really separate, siloed knowledge. So that's another thing I would consider when it comes to this dot point. But again, I really recommend that you do a lot of this reading for yourself, because for me, I found that it's something that I wasn't very used to or familiar with, and so it took a bit of repeated exposure for me to go, okay, these are the key themes that are really emerging, and to gain more confidence in terms of being able to teach that. So for learning within a system, one of the examples that we really look at, and particularly with memory, are about song lines. And I would encourage you to forward links here with other areas of the study design as well. So a lot of this we're looking at, the idea of patterned on country. We know country is not just about their physical geography, but considering the more holistic and interconnected elements as well. With the hippocampus, which is responsible for consolidating your declarative memory, that also has a spatial map in it. So it makes sense that if you're looking at knowledge that's really tied in to where you are, that this could help with integrating that knowledge and strengthening it in. Another thing when we're considering memory is that we have this process called elaborative rehearsal, where as we tie more connection onto knowledge, that can strengthen the encoding of memory. So more meaning and more connection is going to increase your success. And as I've kind of briefly mentioned, when we are looking at this topic, we see a lot of interconnections being forged, a lot of meaning being integrated together. And so it makes sense that you can see some really strong outcomes from that sort of approach. One of the specific examples that we consider sung narrative. Sometimes when you're looking at, I know in an Aboriginal context, this can be not with like, a huge range of like instruments, for example, and sometimes it can be described as a form more of like poetry, as opposed to what you might think of as singing. Again, I'm trying to be careful here not to generalize because there's so much diversity that you have, and also because my knowledge is fairly limited when it comes to this. But you have frequently multiple different areas being taught about at the same time. And when we're thinking about a songline that connects like across various different locations and is really tied into the landscape, in addition to having this more like spoken information, which can have like instrumental or beat accompaniment, you can have other actions in there as well, which are going to add to that. For example, dance, e.g. showing how like kangaroos move, they add more information to tie in and strengthen that knowledge. So as a basic example of where we're thinking about, it's easier to remember frog, water, swim, because those words have meaning to us. Whereas if we look at like cheer, it's going to be a lot harder to understand that. So where we've got more meaning, it's easier to have those memories come in. As mentioned, the hippocampus has a spatial map composed of place cells. We expect when someone is repeatedly using and accessing this, we can strengthen that layout as well. We know that, for example, taxi drivers who have learned this real large network of streets, then to have an enlarged area for it. So it makes sense that if people really dedicate themselves to, practicing techniques that rely a lot on location, that they're going to develop a spatial map, which is going to be stronger and more integrated. So this could be one reason for the success that we see in terms of being able to transmit generation over, thousands and thousands of years without needing to rely on techniques like writing that information down.